bankruptcies. CEOs stepped up this year, Benioff said. We would not be where we are in the world today without the outstanding leadership of many, many CEOs who did heroic work all over the world to basically save their communities. Given the wretched state of the world at that moment, Benioff's depiction was breathtaking, a striking form of self-aggrandizement served up as social concern. It highlighted the gap between the billionaire class and the rest of humankind, one that stretched beyond the decimal places required to convey their fortunes. Benioff and his fellow corporate chieftains were effectively inhabitants of a separate reality, the realm of Davos Man. Around the world, the pandemic had killed more than 2 million people, while threatening hundreds of millions with poverty and hunger. The actual culprit was the coronavirus, but its lethal impacts and economic ravages had been magnified by the actions of the sorts of CEOs who flocked to Davos. Private equity magnates like Steven Schwarzman, who once described a proposed tax increase on the wealthy as an act of war, like when Hitler invaded Poland, had extracted profits from his investments in hospitals, excising costs while contributing to a systemic diminishing of American healthcare. Jamie Dimon, overseer of the biggest bank in the United States, had helped secure tax cuts for people who lived in Park Avenue penthouses, paid for by a weakening of government services. Larry Fink, the world's largest asset manager, broadcast his putative concern for social justice while squeezing poor countries to pay impossible debts in the midst of the pandemic. The richest man on Earth, Jeff Bezos, had added to the colossal scale of his e-commerce empire while failing to provide warehouse workers with protective gear, instead bestowing a valiant-sounding title. They were essential workers, a label that condemned them as dispensable, rendering the virus an illegitimate reason to stay home. If the agony of 2020 had demonstrated anything, it was how the rich could not only prosper, but profiteer off everyone else's suffering. By the end of the year, the collective wealth of billionaires worldwide had increased by $3.9 trillion, even as their philanthropic contributions fell to their lowest level in nearly a decade. Over the same year, as many as 500 million people descended into poverty, with their recovery likely to take a decade or more. The pharmaceutical companies had indeed displayed mastery in concocting COVID-19 vaccines, but they had priced most of humanity out of the market for their life-saving medicines. Inside his oceanfront estate in Hawaii, Benioff preferred to exult in his triumphs while using the pandemic as an opportunity to impugn government. Davos Man championed stakeholder capitalism as a means of preempting government regulation, as a substitute for the public making use of democracy to fairly distribute the gains of capitalism. In taking a bow on behalf of corporate executives, Benioff was implicitly advancing the idea that the government need not tax billionaires because they could be entrusted to fix life's problems out of their own beneficence. CEOs are gathering every week to figure out how we can improve the state of the world and get through this pandemic, he said, contrasting that against what he described as the dysfunction of governments and nonprofit organizations. They were not the ones who saved us, Benioff said. So the public is counting on CEOs. Benioff was revealing himself as a choice specimen of a species that we must understand if we are to make sense of what has happened to humanity over the last half-century. Widening economic inequality, intensifying public anger, and threats to democratic governance have all resulted from the depredation of Davos Man, an unusual predator whose power comes in part from his keen ability to adopt the guise of an ally. Over recent decades, the billionaire class has ransacked governments by shirking taxes, leaving societies deprived of the resources needed to combat trouble. In the midst of a public health emergency, Davos Man was pointing to the resulting weakness of government as justification for depending on his generosity. We have to say it, Benioff said. CEOs are definitely the heroes of 2020. The term Davos Man was coined in 2004 by the political scientist Samuel Huntington. He used it to describe the